I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit about something that is still mysterious. So I'm not going to give you the answers to this puzzle. And I want you to approach this with the same degree of curiosity and surprise that you would if you were a child or an intelligent person seeing something that is too remarkable to even consider, and appreciate that there are no answers and the science is yet to be done on this, but it's a story that is rich in discovery and rich in information once it is understood. And to a large extent, a lot of what I've been doing over my life as a scientist, my career as a scientist, has been to sort of look at things that are, in a sense, too wonderful to be true. That's been the sort of story of my life as a scientist. And as an example, this is sort of what got me in to the field. I was at the NIH at the time, and I was studying these frogs. And this is a Xenophus, and we were taking her ovaries out for some, arcane genetic studies using the eggs. And I would sew the frog up and put her back into the tank, which were not particularly sterile, you notice. And you might say that if you did that to an animal and you didn't give it antibiotics and you did deep surgery, sewed her up, plopped her back in, that should look like that 90% of the time. That's not the case. Actually, this is the way they heal, without antibiotics. And this is a week-old wound and a month-old. And working on this animal, using the animal really as a source of eggs, 8 years into it, I had this, oh my God, response. How the heck can this be happening? And that led to the discovery of the existence in the skin of that animal of powerful, undescribed antimicrobial agents, antibiotics. It opened the field of antimicrobial peptides, now a branch of innate immunity. And what we discovered was that in the skin of this animal, this is a cross-section, there are these juicy nerve endings. And the nerve endings contain at least a dozen powerful antibiotic peptides. And when the animal is injured, these are released. And to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, if we take some adrenaline, just put it on the skin, within a few seconds, and this actually would happen in an injury, but I'm now doing it as a sort of a drug. Now I put a little adrenaline on and I rub the skin, and now what's happening is that this animal is now secreting a powerful antibiotic, mixture of antibiotics on its skin. They're so powerful that no organism, parasite, worm, virus, bacterium, would survive. And if you can imagine it at a site of an injury, that's what's released, and it covers the wound with a sort of gel, and the wound heals. And the animal then, moves on happily. This design has been repeated again and again in nature. And we now know that your lungs do very much the same thing. Your gut does very much the same thing. So that an organism, your stool, for example, really doesn't come in contact with the wall of the bowel. There's a thin film of antimicrobial peptides that keep us isolated. And in diseases like cystic fibrosis and Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, there's something wrong with this. And the body suddenly comes in contact with organisms that it should not be coming in contact with, and all hell breaks loose. And that's what you end up with cystic fibrosis and Crohn's. So there's a lot of biology that has been extended into human disease and health in these, as a consequence of these stories. I was also interested in another animal that exhibited health that was too wonderful to be true. And this is, I think everybody can recognize the silhouette or the animal. It's a shark. And what's interesting about the shark is that if this is the sort of tree of life in terms of evolution, the shark is at the very close to the very bottom. It's one of the earliest of animals. And everybody has appeared on Earth later. Now this critter is very likely 400 million years old. So for 400 million years, this animal's design, presumably the design, we don't really know, but we think, hasn't changed. Well, it is surprising that if you look at its immune system, the way we would look at your immune system, my immune system, antibodies, T cells, how well we respond to vaccines and so on, these animals would be more like a bubble baby. So can you picture, now how the heck does a bubble baby type, an immune and competent animal survive so effectively? And they're not short-lived. They live for a long time. And the dogfish, which is the animal I've studied, has a little spine. And every year, like a tree ring, you can see another ring. And these animals live a long time. And it's really remarkable. There's no evidence that there's even a virus known that can infect these animals. So how is this possible? So what we decided, having discovered antimicrobial peptides in frogs, we thought, well, maybe this animal is making a penicillin or something, something like that. And sure enough, that led to the discovery. I was at Penn at the time when this happened, of a whole new class of antibiotic. So in the animal's body, in the liver, something that this structure, this thing is actually made. It is made. And it is more powerful than known antibiotics and widely and active against a whole host of things. I should point out that the other part of my life has been to take these discoveries and to develop them. So I have developed and involved in the development of this compound and the previous type, not exactly the type from the frog, but related for human disease. So I have been involved deeply in biotechnology. So I'm the sort of character that just doesn't only publish papers. I really feel it's important to, take the stuff you discover in the laboratory and apply it. And that's been very much part of what I do and what I think is important. So here's a miracle that I can't fully answer. So, but if you were students now, and you are still in a sense, this is for you to see, to sort of uncover. And I can give you some guidance as to what the right answer might be, but it's still only guidance. And this insight, this story emerged about 10 years ago, and I was giving a lecture in Scotland, and at St. Andrews, and I learned something very puzzling from one of the biologists there, and I didn't know this. I learned that about 40%, half, maybe more, of the dolphins that swim around the coast of Australia clearly have been bitten by a shark. And we were chatting a little bit, and the marine biologist sort of just said that in passing, and I looked it up, and yeah, it looks like that's the case. There are these little markings you can see, and not little, but you see these sort of white markings on dolphins, and yeah, they've been bitten. But although he took it for granted, just as the thousands of scientists who use Xenopus, and even myself, took for granted the fact that we could do surgery on these animals and they healed, this biologist didn't appreciate that this was a miracle. And that's what initiated this whole story. So immediately, think about this. How the heck does a warm-blooded animal, like a mammal, it's a mammal, it's not a fish, it's a mammal. Even if it were a fish, it would be amazing. But this is a mammal, warm-blooded like us, or a dog, or a cow, or a cat. How does it survive a shark bite in the ocean? Right? I mean, wait a second, that's crazy. And if we could figure this out, could we use it to help people, you know, who are injured or whatever? I mean, it's kind of remarkable. So look, this is what a shark bite looks on a human. And you notice this person's getting ready for surgery. If this occurred in the water and no antibiotics were offered, no control of bleeding was provided, no surgical debridement was provided, I don't think any of you would doubt what the outcome would be. The organisms that are on the mouth of a shark are very well studied, because it turns out that people who do get bitten have to now be treated with antibiotics. So infectious disease people, have swabbed. Let me turn this. Excuse me. Have swabbed. Have swabbed the jaws, and they know the organism, and they're horrible. They're gram-negative organisms that we really don't have good antibiotics against. So this would be, you die of sepsis. That's what happens. You die. Now, that's the type of bite I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a love bite. This is a dolphin that has been bitten by a shark. Okay? I'll show you what happens to that animal. But this animal never touched land and simply was being monitored by people off the coast. So this one has never seen a human hand. Okay? So here's what is known. There was nothing in the literature. Go into the major encyclopedias on dolphins. Look it up on Google. See how dolphins heal. You'll find nothing. Now you'll find the paper I wrote, but there was nothing there. It's really funny. And you see, but what you realize from scattered reports is that they recover fast. They restore their normal contours, which makes sense, because if the dolphin were now crippled, it wouldn't have survived. They'd be eaten up, because there's sharks in the water that are there waiting to eat that dolphin. And it's clear that they have limited blood loss because they bleed to death. You sort of know that. And it's also very clear that they're indifferent to pain, because if they were exhibiting pain, that also would be a sign of injury, and they would be eaten. So they've got, already that there's some really strange things going on, but they're not established in the literature. So that if you were a student or any intelligent individual wanting to sort of study this, you'd find no answers. So the dolphin, just to give you a sense of what this animal, where it comes from, believe it or not, is related to the hippo. Isn't that funny? So genetically, you can sort of match sequences, and their parent, the parent of the dolphin, and the cousin of the dolphin is the hippo. All right? And it's kind of interesting that, the dolphin and the hippo both sort of are water. They like mammals that happen to like water. The dolphin is extremely well studied, right? I mean, as kids, they're fast swimmers. It's a lot of work on how fast they swim and why they swim. Everybody knows they're exceedingly intelligent. They're probably the most intelligent animal other than us. Maybe they're more intelligent, but we can't tell. They have speech. They have language. We know a lot about how they dive and their physiology. We know about their sonar. We know that they're extremely intelligent emotionally, much more so than dogs and pets that we have. And we also know, if you look, that virtually nothing is known about healing. So you would think, just by the absence of this story in the literature, that there isn't something miraculous, but that's quite the contrary. It is miraculous, but unreported. That's surprising at this day and age, you can say that. So this is how a dolphin heals. And what I did was I contacted some people who have been caring for injured animals and did this the way I would normally follow a person who had sustained an injury. I got a hold of the doc, I got a hold of the records, and we both went over the patient. And I examined, not the patient, I didn't go to Australia to see this animal, but we went over the records carefully. And I did this with 2 animals, and then and a third as well, but you'll see the story. So this is Nari, and Nari is 3 or so years old. It's a male. Turns out that Nari was a resident of the waters around this particular dolphin retreat. And one day, Nari didn't show up for feeding. The following day, Nari is accompanied by another dolphin, another male, Nari's friend, who it turns out had been bitten like Nari several years earlier. Kind of an interesting other animal. And Nari comes in looking like this. This wound is about this big. Now Nari is coming in, and Nari is not crying. Nari is coming to the feeding area. Nari, about a week after surgery, what was seen is that this wound is now covered with a white, oily bandage. The whole wound has now been covered. I'll explain what that is. But by 2 weeks, that white stuff has begun to tear away, and you start to see this pink healing tissue. We call it granulation tissue. But what's interesting is that it's all rising from the bottom. All right? So in your meals, I'll show you, your clothes like that. Doesn't look like this. This is coming up from the bottom. And you'll also notice 2 weeks into this isn't looking so bad. You'll also notice that it doesn't look inflamed. There's no antibiotics given. By 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks further, 3.5 weeks, 6 weeks. What's happening now is the skin is closing. The wound is rising, skin is closing. And by roughly 6, 7 weeks, these latest photos, blah, 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 it is truly amazing to see how fast Nari has healed without stitches. This is the group that's been following it. They cleaned away the wound. That was the full experience. Nari has done all of the healing himself, and that was the point I want to make. This is the miracle, okay? This is Nikki. So Nikki didn't ever touch land. This is Nikki in the beginning, and you'll notice this granulation tissue. You'll notice closure, and by 9 months, no infection, no swelling, no significant deformity when you consider what's actually happened. And the animal is obviously fully functional. So here's what we know. So we're going to start to see if we can unravel this. The animal doesn't bleed to death. Within hours, really within hours, you see this white stuff, this white wound, this white dressing With time, the tissues are debrided, the dead tissues are debrided, which we would normally do surgically. The wounds fill from below, closing the animal up as opposed to this way, and there's no infection, no inflammation, and there's no pain, apparent pain. Now, what about control of bleeding? And this is easy. This is the easiest. And it's easiest because it almost certainly is caused by the diving reflex. So that what happens to a diving animal, mammal, even a baby, a newborn baby, and much of this study, by the way, has been done with seals. Take a seal, you tip its head in water, and all of a sudden things happen in its body. What happens in the diving reflex is that the body does not want to waste oxygen. It's just had a breath. There's oxygen in the body. The last thing it's going to do as it's diving is waste it on muscles, gut, anything but the brain. So what the body does is it shuts blood flow off everywhere except between the heart and the brain. So, and that's what this sort of thing shows to this poor seal. Blood flow stops absolutely everywhere except the brain. And what must happen is that as soon as that dolphin is bitten, it must dive. Gets away from the shark, but it's more than that. And this clamps off blood flow to the injury, and that's clearly what must happen. So I don't think that that's as complicated as all that. So, but you sort of know that if you would ever see a bitten dolphin, 99% likely they're just taking a deep dive. Okay. So that's what I think. That would be the expectation. And at that point, the wound clots, and under that setting, you start to see clotting. What about healing? So the dolphin has muscle like we do, but then they've got something else, and it's called blubber. And I must tell you that before I started reading about this, I thought blubber was fat. No, it's fat. It isn't fat. Blubber is sort of like, let's see if I have it. Blubber is sort of like a wetsuit. It's got a weave, it's got a springiness, and every part of the animal has a different weave, as you'd imagine. So that when the animal is swimming, it's sort of like a spring. It stores some energy here, lets it go, lets it go. So it's part of its insulation, but it also is part of what makes this animal so effective. Darn, let me get this thing out. Oh, here we go. Okay, so.
Dr. Zazloff,
yeah.
I have a question. So on the previous slides where you had shown the first dolphin.
Yes.
What kind of surgery was done on it?
No surgery was done, except what they decided to do in this particular case was take some of the dead tissue off.
Okay.
Normally, what happens is that because this animal doesn't stop moving and swims at 30 miles an hour, the movement in the water debrides dead tissue. That's what's happening.
Thank you.
But it's very interesting. It's very difficult. It was very difficult to keep the vets away from these animals. No, that's been the challenge because they feel they've got to do something. And they do nothing. In fact, what they can do is actually make it worse. So the point I want to make is that the blubber is not fat. It has a very complex structure. And what is most amazing is that when the dolphin is heals, what is being replaced is this complex weave. And the weave being replaced is being replaced in an appropriate weave pattern for the areas that were damaged. This is not wound repair. This is regeneration. This is the restoration of a normal tissue. That's called regeneration. It's not called wound repair. And this is wound repair in you or me. You get a wound, it fills with a clot, then scar tissue comes in. We call it granulation tissue, but it's scarring, and then there's contraction. And if I had a wound, a serious wound, a large wound, what would happen is this wound would now contract. And a person badly injured has to deal with this problem. Soft tissue that has been injured will contract. And I would now no longer retain the normal function of my limb. And the surgeons have to really have to work hard to permit wound healing that spares the function of the limb. The dolphin is doing this naturally. So immediately you know that there are stem cells, there are all sorts of things that are involved. And actually, it's what the dolphin is doing is closer to the way the salamander regrows a tail or a leg. So here's a salamander. The leg has been cut off. And by this really remarkable process of regeneration, a little bud over here continues to grow. And as it grows further and further, it differentiates into precisely what should be there at that point with respect to the body. And I should point out, we really don't understand this at all still. So if you actually ask a scientist, how does a limb of a salamander regenerate? Where does this information come from? The answer is nobody has a clue still. Kind of curious. But there is, as you can see, some clue. There's something that we could probably derive if we understood the regenerative process in the dolphin. Dolphin is a mammal and closer to us than a salamander, I must point out. And why no infection? Well, it turns out that for the last 50 years, environmental toxicologists have been taking samples of dolphin, seal, whale blubber, because these animals store in their blubber, this tissue, environmental pollutants. So PCBs, heavy metals, organic garbage that we throw into the ocean are retained, and the toxicologists monitor the levels of pollution by monitoring these animals, the stuff in the tissues. So there are great records of organic chemical compounds, and they're detailed. What's interesting is, if you go through them, and that's what I did, not all of them are of human origin. In fact, there are a number of organohalogens. They're often organohalogens, which means they've got bromine and chlorine and all this stuff. But a number of them, like I've pointed out here, this one and these other ones, are not human. In fact, they probably have come from the ocean, from another animal in the ocean. They probably have been produced by certain marine bacteria, marine fungi, marine algae, plankton, diatoms. And I'll give you an example. This is a substance very much like one of these so-called pollutants. But it's not a pollutant. I mean, this is of non-human origin. It's produced by this Irish moss. And why does the Irish moss produce it? The Irish moss produces it in a gland cell, right on its surface, like the frog. It's not different. It has the same problem the frog has. There's some creature in the ocean that wants to eat that Irish moss. It sees it like it's a nice, delicious piece of lettuce. But the Irish moss does not want to be eaten. So what the Irish moss does, nor does it want to serve as an inhabitant, a colony for some bacteria. What the Irish moss does is it has glands. That's what these little gland cells are. And the gland cells produce this stuff. And the gland cells stop the growth of bacteria. That substance ends up, this thing, ends up in the food chain. And the dolphin doesn't destroy it when it goes into its body. It puts it into its blubber. So the dolphin is actually eating marine organisms that have themselves absorbed some of the protective antibiotics that are produced by other creatures to protect themselves from the microbes of the ocean. So the dolphin is storing those very substances that the plants and diatoms have been making to protect themselves from the same creatures that the dolphin has to worry about. What's interesting is that these are substances that are active against very complicated organisms and are also compatible with the physiology of a mammal. So that if you were looking for new and powerful antimicrobial agents that would be compatible with our physiology, in other words, wouldn't kill us, and would be active against these very complex organisms, it would be very interesting to pursue some of these. So this would be a source of rich antibiotic discovery. Now here's Nari. I want you to see Nari. So this is Nari 1 week after injury. I should point out that dolphins feel pain. So that if you want to take blood from a dolphin, you have to prick, you go into, there's a vein in the back of the dorsal fin. And you got to stick it like you would another animal. And they hate that. So that they know when the vet's coming over, you can imagine they're like kids, like people. Boom. So they've got to really, they try to condition the animal in some fashion or another. So there's no question that the animals feel pain. But the injury that is generated on the back in the soft tissue clearly provokes some other response. Okay, now here's Nari. This is a week after, okay? So there's Nari, she's in a pool. All right. He's in, male. Now he's eating. The handler said there is no way of identifying, you could not tell that Nari was in any way disturbed. So this would be like one of us, me, walking into the cafeteria. My arm is just, 2 or 3 days before it's been ripped off. I'm smoking a cigarette, having a hot dog, and you're looking at me and you're saying, what? No moaning, nothing. So the question is, how is this possible? And there are a number of possibilities. One of them is that there's a very interesting and complicated gating system in this animal's nervous system, so that pain that would normally be registered is now not being registered, something like that. The other possibility is that at the site of injury, the animal is producing its own powerful morphine. Now, that would be extraordinary, wouldn't it? Something that is of that power being produced. So if you had a laboratory, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, to be able to now, in some way or another, capture that compound. I mean, suppose it is being produced by the wound. Suppose it is being produced by decomposing blubber. You could identify it, and there are easy ways to do that. How would you isolate it? And that's easy also. I mean, you could give a college student or high school student with the appropriate guidance all the information it would need, he or she would need to do this. And appreciate that if it were, which it may not be, but if it were found in that tissue, we would get its structure, we would be able to make it, we wouldn't have to use an animal, you'd synthesize it, and you would now very likely revolutionize pain management, because clearly the dolphin does not become addicted to that substance. So it's a natural, powerful analgesic, right? And it's almost certainly central. It's not local. I don't think it would be local. It doesn't look like it has that. So here's what goes on. Injury. Boom, the animal dies. That reduction in blood flow to that tissue probably sets off a whole healing process. The blubber begins to move and produces an anti-infective barrier, which are also possible that the new tissue is capable of doing that. New stem cells and regeneration somehow is being promoted. It would be wonderful to know what growth factors are involved. And this tissue regenerates. The skin closes. And as this is happening, some sort of pain relief is taking place, which very well could represent a totally new class of analgesic. So you could say to me, wait a second, this is impossible. How the heck does an animal like the dolphin acquire something new? That would be very unusual, I should point out, in biology. It's rare for that level of complexity to be acquired new. It just doesn't happen. So what could be going on? And I'll tell you what I think. I think that what we're seeing in the dolphin is the fetus. I think that when you or I, let me stop. We know that we can operate on a human or a mammalian fetus. We do this. And we can do it without scarring. So fetal surgery is dramatic in that scarring, when it's done at the right time, doesn't happen. It is regenerative. For all we know, there is no pain. I don't know. We really don't know. But what I think must be happening is that, unlike terrestrial animals who change healing programs at birth, we're now going to become a terrestrial healer, not a ocean healer, fetal healer. I think the dolphin continues, and it says, a lot of that program I'm going to retain. And the reason it had to probably do that is that it emerged around sharks. It had to have some trick to survive. It just simply couldn't, as a mammal, survive in the midst of these animals. It had to have some adaptation. And so I think that what we're looking at when we see the dolphin is we're getting a close-up view of how the fetus, aspects of how a fetus heals. It'd be interesting to know if there are programs of infectious control that we don't even understand in the fetus. We don't know. We really don't. We know very little about fetal growth. Be interesting if, again, the regenerative capacities are well, we know they're very robust in the fetus. But in any case, when you look at the dolphin, I think, when I look at the dolphin now, I'm looking at, I know I'm looking at aspects of fetal healing. And that's kind of remarkable. So really, if we understood how the dolphin healed, I think we'd know a great deal more about ourselves. And we'd know a great deal more about how to help humans after injury and maybe to prevent injury. And so the title of the talk, Too Wonderful to Be True, really comes from Michael Faraday. And Michael Faraday had this above his laboratory. And for those who don't know, Faraday was probably the greatest experimental scientist, physicist, ever. He lived in the 1800s and was responsible for teaching us about electromagnetism, electricity and magnetism. So the motor, the generator, what a magnet is all about, were his discoveries. And as a consequence of his extraordinary observations, somebody named James Clerk Maxwell was able to actually come up with the equations of electromagnetism, which is amazing. But you have to look at his equipment to really appreciate what I'm talking about. His magnets look like, you can't believe it. His compass and things he used to measure magnetic fields. So a darning needle and a silk thread. I mean, it's at that level. Cork, water, iron filings. And with that, he established basic principles of electromagnetism. And the reason I like that is that it really shows that you don't need all that much. You need to have a good imagination. You need some equipment, but a lot of it really is good thought, clear thinking, and perseverance, and a personality that says, because I don't have it, I can't do it. I'll do it. This is exciting. I got to figure this out. And that's why I love Michael Faraday as a sort of historical mentor for me. I just think he is an extraordinary, scientist. By the way, one of the most wonderful little books, if you ever can get a hold of it, is called The Chemical History of a Candle. And what he used to do at Christmas time is he'd give these public lectures for kids, which was wonderful. And these would be sort of like experimental things, so he'd have this, chemical laboratory, you'd have a typical classroom. And in this one beautiful book, he basically explains a candle and explaining how it burns, its color, where the fire is coming from, and so on. He teaches these kids everything that was known basically about gas laws and combustion and so on, fundamental chemistry at that time. It's a wonderful book. Anyway, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's really, it's always a pleasure to meet those responsible for the running and functioning of an institution, and you guys are the best. So, thanks.
I could add that this afternoon, in 2005, Dr. Zasloff is going to broadcast to inner city children, rural children through the Kilby org. So that little story about Michael Faraday teaching the kids, you're going to be doing that this afternoon.
Yeah, in my own way. Yeah.
We've probably all done those Michael Faraday experiments in high school, and the needle and the thread, and
yeah,
be very familiar.
Yeah, but I think it's it's funny you get, and I don't want to speak negatively about my colleagues, but the reality is that frequently a young investigator will walk into a laboratory and say, I cannot do it. I mean, I need this and I need that, and this is impossible. And that is sort of that's already, that person is doomed. Doomed. That person is doomed. Most of the time you can get pretty far so long as you believe that you can accomplish what it is you'd like to accomplish. So but Faraday, hey.
I love that. That's the philosophy we're trying to instill in our department, is the yes you can, how to get to yes in a way that is, respectful, and you can get to yes. This is a matter of the work that you put in and figuring out and being innovative and maybe trying things you weren't necessarily as comfortable with.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate
You're right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Could I have one other question? One thing I do know is that Dr. Zazloff, in his role as scientific director for the Transplant Institute, they're doing some extraordinary transplants that I think most people don't know we're doing. Could you just tell a few examples of what you're doing?
Well, it's kind of hard to believe, but probably the most interesting one is the transplantation of the gut. So, we can take a human gut. Kid will come in. Kid will be born. A child will be born with a malformed, non-functional gut, and the gut will have to be taken out and reconnected. But usually, the child, although the child can be sustained with intravenous feeding, that kid will eventually not be able to. So something has to be done to replace the gut. But really, it's Tom Fishbein who's the head of that group.
Is that small and large intestine?
Small and large. And what has been possible now has been to take the gut of one person, and of course this person unfortunately has to have died, and put it with all its bacteria and all of the stuff, into the body of another person. And that procedure is becoming increasingly more successful. And what they do at this point is they'll actually do multi-organ sometimes. They'll take the stomach, pancreas, liver, kidneys, just take the whole collection of organs and transplant them. But we've learned a great deal about immunology in this, as a consequence of the success and in some cases failure. But that's probably, I think, the most dramatic of what we can do right now. And so Georgetown is the world leader in that, international leader in the field of organ of intestinal transplantation. And it's principally Tom Fishbein. I've been responsible for some of the immunology, but Tom's hands are very much the reason we're so successful. Yes?
The question, I saw by the diving effect that the adrenal glands don't shut down the same way the other organs
Yes.
shut down next to the lung. Do the dolphins have a similar balance between parasympathicus and sympathicus?
Yes, they do. But that's a very good point. So there obviously is a role for cortisone. The adrenal cortex is still obviously producing steroids. So there's a lot of flow, but the total volume of blood that perfuses the adrenal gland is very small compared to its musculature. So there are some tissues, and that's very perceptive of you.
What I'm saying is, so we know it also in human, if they have injury, ripping the hand off due to the adrenaline what is released, they don't
Yes.
feel the pain.
For a period.
For a short period.
For a short period, exactly. But not for 4 days, 8 weeks, that sort of thing. Anyone who's experienced toothache knows that's true.
So what's your next big thing?
Well, I'll tell you what you want to know what the next big thing is. You'll be reading about it. No, I will tell